Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 8th of September of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with Kherson area. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce clashes, artillery duels, bombings and so on, as a result of all those actions, all those events that took place during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 25 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system Stab B. The Ukrainians have completed their concentration and accumulation of their forces along the Dnieper River, but for some reason the Ukrainians are not launching any offensive operation. The question is why they're not attacking. Probably the Ukrainians are not going to attack, and the main reason, the main purpose of all these things is that they want to force the Russians to keep some forces in this area, to keep some reserves and so on. As the same thing as the Russians did on the Kupiansk front line. They started to attack, forced the Ukrainians to move some strategical reserves, and after that the Russians slowed down, and currently the Ukrainians are forced to keep some forces there, and of course not in favor of Robotyne or Kupiansk front or Bakhmut-Artyomovsk front lines. Now we are moving further to Robotyne area, and today we got very interesting detail from the Russian sources on the ground. The Russian soldiers on the ground reported that for the first time since the beginning of the battle for Bradley Square for Robotyne, the Russians used the cluster rounds of Russian production. Then they start using this massively. Of course, we see maybe the Ukrainians didn't expect this. The Russians will start use this type of weapon. They have concentrated significant number of forces in this area. We understand that the Ukrainians have almost launched another wave, another assault of Verbovo. They have almost reached the outskirts of Novoprokopovka and bypassed Robotyne. They have concentrated forces. If you remember, during the previous days, the Ukrainians were moving, sending more hundreds and hundreds armored vehicles in south direction. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainians with drones, with artillery strikes, with FPV drones and so on. But anyway, the Ukrainians managed to concentrate forces, and they were about to start another wave of attack. And what did the Russians do? They attacked this area, the concentration of Ukrainian forces, with the cluster rounds. Probably this is the game changer, and of course we'll see whether this situation can turn the entire scope, turn the entire possibilities of Ukrainians or not. But anyway, this is very interesting. Furthermore, we got very interesting video from the south of Robotyne. The Ukrainians published the video how they discovered and attacked the Russian forces among the trenches and the strongholds. We're using this video just for geolocation purpose to understand that the Russians still controls the fields that located on the north of Novoprokopovka. As a result of fierce clashes in this area, the Ukrainians tried to concentrate their forces to continue sending more and more reserves. They were trying to attack Verbovo, and as a result of all these clashes, the Ukrainians lost on Zaporozhye area 40 soldiers. The Russians reported that they managed to repel up to 5 attacks of 82nd Brigade in direction of Verbovo. This is our 82nd Brigade, and currently this is the main forces who try to attack in direction and to continue offensive to the south. Furthermore, the Russians during the previous day, made a lot of attacks against the settlements like Mala-Takmachka. The Ukrainians, the pattern is the same from one attack to another. First, the Ukrainians need to concentrate and accumulate their forces in Mala-Takmachka or in Orekhov. The Russians control the entire situation, and only after that they can make a small or powerful rush to the south. The Russians see everything, and when they discover this or that accumulation of forces, the Russians start attacking the Ukrainians heavily and massively, of course. Now we are moving to the Guliai-Polye area. Today this is probably the poorest front line when talking about some events, and just 2 geolocated videos we got today. How the Ukrainians sent some reconnaissance teams to the south, trying to discover positions, probably to find safe roads for possible offensive operation to the south. The Russians discovered everything, and after that they attacked the Ukrainian forces. And the Ukrainians also published the video how they discovered the Russian mortar system somewhere in this area. Another reconnaissance team, but from the Russian side, was attacked by the Ukrainian artillery systems. Now we are moving to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead, and currently this is the main area, the main offensive area from the Ukrainian side. The Russians during the previous days made significant, during the previous 24 hours, attacked the main Ukrainians attack roads, supply roads with TOS flamethrower systems with artillery rounds. The Russians were bombing and attacking the edge Ukrainian positions. And for example, in this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing the forest line, and after that, they started bombing small islands, forest islands, somewhere between the fields. This area the Russians lost during the Battle of Urozhaine almost a month ago. The Ukrainians managed to dig in deeper, and they're using this, let's say, stronghold for concentration of forces for further offensive operation. It's about Urozhaine. When talking about this area, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours lost 190 soldiers. So the level of losses is still very heavy: 7 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system M777 howitzer. But the most important events took place in the vicinity of Novodonetsk and in the vicinity of Novomayorsk. The Ukrainians, if you remember, launched a very powerful attack. They managed, first of all, to concentrate 2 armored fists. One of them was concentrated in Zolotaya Niva. After that, the Ukrainians launched attack. Furthermore, the Ukrainians managed to build few pontoon bridges in this area, which allowed them to attack the settlement not just from the north, but also, let's call it, from the west and from the southwest. And that happened just because of those pontoon bridges. And another wave of attack took place from Prichistovka to the south, and yesterday we got updated as a result of clashes in this area. There were also more pontoon bridges that allowed the Ukrainians to attack the settlement not from one direction but at least from 2 directions. And as a result of those clashes, at least yesterday we got update that Ukrainians entered the northern part of Novodonetsk, and currently there is a very fierce clashes for the settlement. And the second update we got today, that as a result of attack from Prichistovka in direction of Novomayorsk, the Ukrainians also managed to enter the northern part of the settlement, and currently the Ukrainians are trying to dig in deeper by sending more and more forces in this area. The Russians have already launched a series of counterattacks, but yet the Russians haven't managed to force the Ukrainians to step back. So this is an interesting operation. We can call it like broad frontline attack from the Ukrainian side using the armored fist. As we can see, as a result of these 2 attacks, they managed to capture some buildings, some trenches, some strongholds on the northern parts of those settlements. I believe that both these 2 settlements, Novodonetsk and Novomayorsk, will repeat the destiny of Robotyne. Basically, they will be reduced till ruins, and after that, the Ukrainians will try to continue further in direction of Kremenchuk and, of course, in direction of Yevgeniivka. The Russians continue bombing and attacking Konstantinovka. Another video we got today, how the Russians managed to discover another Ukrainian position, another operational ammo depot, and as a result of artillery strike, that ammo depot was destroyed. Just yesterday we discussed another bombing of the settlement Konstantinovka. We remember that the town was completely under fire. If you ask my opinion, I'll tell you one more time. Let's increase the number of updates because it's very important. Let's increase them since the beginning of August, right? So if we take a look at this map, we see that almost every single building in this area was attacked by the Russians. Every single stronghold, every single ammo depot was destroyed and attacked by the Russians during the previous 40 days. If you ask my opinion, this is a classical artillery and all types of preparation before a very massive attack. But yet the Russians haven't launched anything, and we see that the Ukrainians have significant problems in this direction because we see complete absence of any counter artillery or counter drone or counter missile duels in this direction. When talking about Donetsk area, the Russians also have intensified their activity in the vicinity of Avdiivka. Just from the beginning of September, we see the Russians are concentrated in Pervomaiska. The Russians continue bombing and attacking 2 settlements, Tonnika and Severnaya. Today we got very interesting video how the Russians discovered the Ukrainians who was trying to do something in the fields under the open sky, and as a result of strike machine, this car was destroyed and the soldiers around there. So we see that the Russians continue artillery preparation of the fields, let's say on the west of Avdiivka. The Russians continue bombing the water pump station that located on the east of Avdiivka. I'm not saying that the Russians are going to launch like a assault operation tomorrow, but we see that they're working in this direction. But maybe as a secondary direction, I believe if we even talk about Avdiivka, Novomikhailivka, I believe that Novomikhailivka has a bigger priority for the Russians because it's a clear and obvious attack in the Ukrainian flank of Velika Novosilovka offensive operation, and I believe that we are going to see this operation during the Ukrainian greatest counter-offensive on the Vremevka tactical bridgehead. A lot of interesting updates are coming from Klishchevka-Andreevka area. The Ukrainians have encircled Andreevka, have established the operational encirclement, probably even a small operational cauldron, if we can call it like this. I'm not saying that there is like thousands of the Russians. There is like underground facilities, underground tunnel that the Russians use to send their forces from the mainland. This is their like supply road that the Ukrainians can't get with the fire. But anyway, during the previous days, the Ukrainians managed to dig in deeper on the northern flank of Andreevka, and the Ukrainians managed to dig in deeper on the southern flank of Andreevka. And the Russians made few attempts to counterattack in this direction, trying to force the Ukrainians to step back, but all those attacks from the Russian side were repelled. And today, for example, the Ukrainians published another video how the Russians were trying to counterattack, at least on the southern pincer of this on this area, but the Ukrainians, the 3rd Brigade published this video, and that attack was repelled by the Ukrainians without losses, and a few Russian soldiers were wounded, probably one was killed, and the Russians were forced to step back. So anyway, the Ukrainians still control the pincers in this area, and also the Ukrainians continue bombing and attacking the same settlement, the Andreevka settlement. There are still some forces, but this is not a very big village, as you can see, just 2 streets, and this area is already reduced to ruins, and the situation in Andreevka is much worse in comparison with Klishchevka, but Klishchevka is bigger, as you can see. Andreevka is very small, and there are no place to hide, so that's why the Russians do have losses in this area. I can't tell you whether the losses are significant or not, but yet they're blocked, and they need to take a decision, or to counterattack with heavy losses but to restore control over the railways, or to step back and to leave this territory for the Ukrainians. As a result of clashes on Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 215 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, and 4 artillery systems. Interesting detail about today that Ukrainians during the day lost at least 2 counter artillery raiders, Bukayvel. This is the Ukrainian technology, and this is very interesting because during the previous days we got reports just about the losses among the INTPQ 36, 37, 47, 50, and now we see that more and more Ukrainian technologies are involved in the conflict. The Russians also published very interesting videos from the central and the northern flank of Battle of Artyomovsk. As a result of a very heavy bombing, the Russians managed to discover and to destroy the Ukrainian positions in the Ukrainian, let's say, track pole parking lots in the Chasov Yar, and there was a very heavy bombing, probably with the guided bombs. We see an explosion, and after that there was a fire. The entire area is almost reduced to ruins, as you can see, and then the Ukrainians published the video of the cars that were set on fire, and the Russians managed finally to repel every single attack of the Ukrainians in the north, in the vicinity of Zhelyznyanska. Today the Russians published the video how they were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions among the forest lines around this forest. So basically the attempt of 30th Mechanized Brigade to establish control over this forest was repelled, and the Ukrainians were defeated and were forced to step back. Before the next video, I will update this forest as under complete Russian control. There was a very fierce clashes, very fierce battles that took place from 20th of August probably till the beginning of September. Now we are moving to the Kup-Liman front line. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 60 soldiers and 4 artillery systems, and probably this is like the 3rd day in a row. So there's a very low activity of artillery systems on this front line from both sides, either from the Russians and from the Ukrainians. The sides are trying to use just drones and storm infantry troopers. This front line is static in this area. There are no changes, neither from the Russians nor from the Ukrainian side. The situation is completely regular, and nobody can develop any progress in this direction because of like very big forest and a lot of traps and mines inside of the forest. When talking about Kupiansk front line, the sources reported that the Russians today, or some sources are saying that during the previous days, the Russians managed to capture Sinkovka at least 2 or 3 times. And every single time, the Ukrainians, as a result of counterattack, forced the Russians to step back. Currently, the settlement Sinkovka repeats the destiny of Robotina. I believe that this settlement is already reduced to ruins and there are no place to hide. The only benefit and the only thing that can give some benefits for both sides is the forest that located on the north and on the west of Sinkovka, and most of the forest is under Russian control, so this gives them significant benefits for the Russians to attack, to counterattack, and to establish control over the settlement. The Ukrainians control just the forest on the south and probably some lines on the west of the settlement. Anyway, this settlement is contested, but as I understand, soon we are going to receive update that either Sinkovka and Petropavlovka is taken by the Russians. Also, very interesting details we start receiving from the border, probably the first confirmation that Ukrainians understand the value of this area. Today the Ukrainians published at least 2 videos how they establish physical drone control over the border line between Oskol river and let's say the Russian territory and LPR, Lugansk People Republic. This is like the pontoon bridge. As you can see, the main bridge was destroyed, there is just pontoon bridge, and the Russians used this area to supply and support their offensive forces in the vicinity of Sinkovka. The Ukrainians redeployed their drone squad in this direction, and currently they trying to establish some control and to reduce the Russian supply and support possibilities in the settlement by the name of Pisky that located on the border. And this video we see another attempt to attack supply machine, probably with the fuel. It was attacked by the FPV drone, and as I understand, the results was pretty successful for the Ukrainians. So we understand what Ukrainians need. They want to establish drone control. It's very easy tactic because there is a river Oskol. The Russians can't counterattack. The only thing they can do is to try to discover, to track and attack the Ukrainians drone squads and drone operators, which is obviously not an easy job to do. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.